I'd like to thank everyone for joining us after a 2-month break. My name is Marsha Hampton. I am the Assistant City Manager here at the City of Douglasville, and I'd like to officially welcome you to our faith-based meeting this morning. And as I said, we do have a full program today. We have Heather Stockdale, who's with us with Georgia Cares. She's going to talk to us about human trafficking. We also have some of our law enforcement agencies here in Douglas County that's going to talk to us a little bit about it, some comments as it relates to us here locally. We have with us Matthew Cruel and Brian Fortner representing the Solicitor's Office and the District Attorney's Office. So as I said, we have a very full program this morning, so hopefully you've gotten your coffee, gotten some breakfast, and you're enjoying that. First, I'd like to start off and introduce Heather Stockdale. Heather is the Executive Director of Georgia Cares. Georgia Cares is a statewide coordinating agency for child victims of trafficking in Georgia. Her role as the Executive Director, she is responsible for the overall development and implementation of the organization's mission and strategic priorities. Heather's professional experience with training within the trafficking and youth development fields serves her vision of sorry, this is what happens when you read on the phone and you need glasses. Serves her vision to pursue strategies and support holistic health and growth of youth while also building the state's capacities to support families and communities in the fight against human trafficking. Heather's passion for child advocacy, youth development, and government policies began during her time working under the Office of Child Advocate. Her aspirations and dedication to the areas led her to the career at the Governor's Office of Children and Families. At Children and Families, Heather was named the director of the statewide task force on commercial sexual exploitation, led the state's trafficking initiatives, and serves as the division administrator of Youth Development Division. Heather serves on several advisory boards and groups for trafficking and youth development related issues and is a proud graduate of the University of Georgia.
Thank you so much. I'll say it a little bit louder. I don't know if we have any Georgia Bulldogs fans in here, but go Dogs. I'm sure you're just as excited as I am about this weekend. Thank you so much, Marsha, for that introduction. As she said, my name is Heather Stockdale. I'm the Executive Director of Georgia Cares, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing across the state and talk to you a little bit about child sex trafficking and the issue here in Georgia. So I'll start off by there are two terms that are kind of widely used. You heard Marsha use one of them, the commercial sexual exploitation of children. So we like to use acronyms. I was in state government for a while, so we call that CSEC. And so what that is sexual activity involving a child in exchange for a good or a service or something of value. So when you hear that term, that's what that means. And it's as a part of our Georgia law, it is a form of mandated child abuse. And then the second term is DMST. Again, another acronym, but what it stands for is domestic minor sex trafficking. And this is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person under the age of 18 for a purpose of a commercial sex act. And this is where the person is a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. And this is from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was passed by Congress in 2000 and is reauthorized every 4 years. So these two terms basically mean the same thing when you hear them. And when you hear child sex trafficking, these are the same things. It's the trafficking, the provision, the transportation of children who are Georgia citizens, U.S. citizens, in exchange for a sexual act for a good or a service. So these terms are synonymously, and I'll use them together. So this is a little bit about human trafficking. I use this chart to show people that child sex trafficking, DMST, CSEC, these are all parts and these are subsets of the greater human trafficking issue as a whole. So you can see human trafficking, very broad. Then you have trafficking for purposes of labor. You have trafficking for purposes of sex. Then in both, you have domestic victims, so citizens of the United States that are being trafficked, and then we also have foreign victims. So these are international victims. So typically what we think of when we hear trafficking is people outside of the United States being trafficked in, which does happen. But again, that is one subset of the whole. And then, of course, you have the trafficking of children under the age of 18, and then you have the trafficking of adults. So you can kind of see the highlight on the right side. That's where we come in. So what does this include? These terms are kind of broad. What does this look like? What do we see in Georgia? And what could this look like if you saw the kid in front of you? So this is street prostitution. So what we all typically think of, what we know of that term as prostitution. Kids on the street that are being bought and sold off of the street. Online ads selling children. So we all know about Craigslist and Backpage. So these are posted ads selling children for sex. And that's where buyers would go online, find those ads, choose the child that they'd like to purchase for the night, and then set that up with the trafficker. So then it's also child pornography, stripping or erotic nude massage. So these are forms of exploitation or trafficking because the child is under the age of 18. They cannot consent, they cannot enter into a legal contract, so they are being victimized. So then this is also escort services, so phone escorts where you could call up and order a woman typically, but they also sell children. Phone sex lines, gang-based prostitution. So one trend that we're seeing and nationally that they're tracking is gang members, instead of using kind of the typical forms of income that we would all think of, guns and drugs, right? They're switching to human trafficking because that's a renewable resource. So it's not a product, a drug that you have one time and you sell it and it's used and it's all gone. It's a renewable resource. It's a renewable product for them that they can continue to make money on. Interfamilial pimping. So this does happen. This is a family member selling a child within their family. And then other forms of internet-based exploitation. So then we really look at this issue on a continuum so that we can understand really what are our preventative efforts, what can we do, and what happens to this point. What happens for kids to get to the point where they're trafficked or exploited. So this is really the child sexual abuse continuum. So you can see when they view themselves as a sexual object because they've been abused as children, which 90% of our victims have been victims of child sexual abuse. Then they don't understand, they link that love, abuse. They think that that's the same thing, and it's difficult for them to see otherwise. And then you have the media influence, some not healthy, great adult relationships that might influence that. And then really it comes down to the demand. If there was not demand for sex with children, these traffickers and pimps would not have a product to sell because no one would be buying that. And so that's kind of how we think about that continuum of this issue. So then everyone wants to know exactly what are the pathways to entry. So what I always say, this can really happen anyway. We've seen it where within 24 hours, a girl is in a chat room online chatting with someone that she doesn't know. They agree to meet up later that night, and that's a trafficker, a pimp. He has her, holds her at gunpoint, and sells her because he's already set up dates for her that night. It can happen that fast, but it can also be a very long grooming process as well. It really just depends, and we see this happen in all sorts of different ways. But really, recruitment, so we're talking about the traffickers now, the exploiters. The way that they recruit, they use seduction. So many of our young girls, this happens to boys as well, but specifically with our girls, the way that they're recruited is they're really seduced by this older man that they honestly believe to be their boyfriend. Now, you and I know that a 35-year-old man dating a 15-year-old, that's not called dating, and that's not appropriate, right? And that's not a healthy relationship, and it's against the law. But to them, if they don't know really what love is, they haven't had that person to love and care for them, or they don't know what a healthy, normal relationship is, they're in love and they think that this person is their boyfriend, and maybe he has done a good job of keeping care of her. Maybe he's put a roof over her head and given her 3 days a meal, and maybe she didn't previously have that. So you can understand how for a child she could think that that's a good relationship. So seduction is a really big one. Coercion, of course, so being forced and coerced into this activity. Peer relationships. So we are finding that peers, oftentimes who are involved in this activity, will go to school and recruit other peers to be a part of this. So we have stories of a young girl in 8th grade, a boy who was a friend of hers in her class, in her science class, who said, "Hey, do you want to come meet my friend? He's really cool. He can buy us some beer. Why don't we go hang out with him after school?" Well, it turns out that was a trafficker. So you can see how that can happen really quickly and easily as well. Then parents exploiting children, kidnapping, and social media enticement. We all know about social media. We all know about how kids are online nowadays, and it's really easy for them to be coerced and kind of recruited through those online means. So the warning signs. So everyone wants to know about risk factors, which is very important, and there are certain risk factors that set kids up to be at higher risk for becoming victims. So runaways, use of substances, mental health history, and then again we talked about the child sexual abuse. But what I like to talk about a lot of times is the warning signs. So what can you do as a person out in the community when you see these kids or come in contact with kids? What are those red flag things that will kind of set off alarms in your head when you see them? So these are a few examples that I'll give you, and what I always say as a disclaimer is because a child has one of these does not automatically mean that he or she is a victim, but we have seen that a combination of some of these risk factors are common in the kids and the victims that we serve. So a few that I'll highlight. A warning sign is if a youth has a significantly older boyfriend, which we mentioned earlier, has started collecting new clothes, shoes, jewelry, or a cell phone that they can't explain. So if this 15-year-old who doesn't have a job and doesn't have a specific way of earning money and income that you know of, all of a sudden has $300 cash, and they can't explain where that came from, a lot of times that is a part of the grooming and recruitment process that these traffickers use, because what they're doing is they're trying to appeal to these young kids. And they're trying to show them how glamorous this life is. So they use money, new clothes, they get their hair done or get their nails done for them. They kind of pamper them and show them how glamorous this life could be if they would work with them. So those are really big ones that we see when they're very far along in the grooming process. Those things will happen. Being secretive about their whereabouts, chatting online with people that their family and friends have not met. Of course, special mark tattoos. A lot of times traffickers use branding. You'll see that a lot on these victims' chests, on their forearms, maybe on their back, where they've branded them as their property. Homelessness and runaway. Of course, those kids are at higher risk for this. And then having an explicitly sexual online profile. And then, of course, having a history of or being charged with prostitution. Even though the age of consent is 16, youth can still be charged with prostitution. If they have been charged with that, what we kind of say is that if you can't consent to sexual activity, how could they consent to being sold and having sex with multiple men every single night, right? They can't consent to that, so they're a victim there. So that's an automatic red flag that you can look for. And then just to kind of explain what this victimization looks like, I know a lot of people have questions about, well, why don't they just leave once they actually figure out what it is that they're involved in? Maybe it looked glamorous at the beginning, but once they're being abused and bought and sold every night, why wouldn't they just leave? And the answer is this power and control dynamic between the trafficker and the child. And kind of just like the way that we think about domestic violence now, we've come a really long way with our understanding, and the question is, why wouldn't the wife who's being beaten by her husband just leave? It's the same thing. It's that bond. She links the love and the abuse together, and it's difficult to leave because of that trauma bond with her, in that example, abuser, and here with the child's trafficker. So this is a psychological bond between these two parties, and it's a power and control dynamic. And what I will say is that these exploiters can use very sophisticated techniques. These are not dumb people. They are criminals, and this is a business enterprise for them. So some of them are bright, and they figured out how to do this in a smart way for them. So they use sometimes very sophisticated techniques with these victims. So isolation, degradation, enforcing trivial demands, threats, occasional indulgences, and exhaustion. So if you're being beaten, but then the next day your trafficker does something really nice for you, maybe they do care. Maybe they are really sorry about what happened. So you can see it's kind of that same cycle that we go through, and these techniques are very sophisticated that they use with victims. And then we also, with trauma bonds, we talk about Stockholm Syndrome. So this is the trauma bond with a perpetrator, and this presents a really huge obstacle for us in the recovery because it's a lot of brainwashing and work that these traffickers have done to make them think otherwise. So we have to do just as much work on the back end with therapy and supportive services to help these kids understand that really they are a victim. This was not their choice, that they were forced into this, and that that person that they thought cared for and loved them was not in their best interest, was not looking out for them, was profiting on them. And so these three things have to occur for Stockholm Syndrome to be present, and that's why, like I said, therapeutic interventions are so important for these kids. So that's where Georgia Cares comes in. So you can understand kind of the victimization and all the work that needs to be done to lead these victims to a road of recovery and restoration and treatment, and that is basically what we do. So we were created by the governor's office in 2009, and now we're an independent nonprofit organization. We serve the entire state of Georgia, and basically our mission is to intervene and identify who these victims are, help find them, help law enforcement rescue them, and then to get them all the services and care that they need. So our mission is to ensure that they receive quality services and care in the state, and of course our vision is that one day this is eradicated. So we function as the single point of entry. So whoever you are, whatever role you play in your community, if you see a child that you think might be exploited, you refer that child to us, and we basically take it from there and take them through our entire system. So you will know that that child's taken care of. And to do that, like I said, we assist law enforcement in the rescue, and we maintain a 24-hour hotline. So anyone can call with tips or can talk to us about a child. A child can call themselves, which they have, and we can find them help. And we collaborate with the other state agencies, Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Family and Children's Services, and the child's non-offending family to determine what that best place for the child will be. And then we basically kind of wrap services and care around that child so that we can make sure that all of the dimensions of child well-being, all of their needs are served. So this is our process. You can see from referral, we go into a screening. So really we're assessing the immediate nature and needs. What do we need to do? Is that child in danger right now? Do we need to immediately find a safe place for that child? Then we go into our assessment, which we use a research and evidence-based assessment to determine what those needs of that child are and what level of trauma he or she has been exposed to, so we know what our recommendations about services, frequency, and duration of services should be. Then we go into service and care planning. So every child has a different experience through this. We found it's not a cookie cutter. It's not if you do A, B, and C, you'll be all better. It's very specific to the victim, what their family life was like, what their childhood was like, how they grew up, what their factors, how they became a victim of this, and then what their actual victimization was like. So we make sure that our approach is based on that individual and that we're keeping the youth's best interests at mind, and that we are also incorporating their choice and their voice in their plan. So I don't know about you, but for any person, for me, if someone was making a plan for me, I would want to have a say in what that plan was, and then I'd have more buy-in, and I'd be willing to do what I needed to do and fulfill my portion of that to get better. And so that's a very important value to us. And then we do check-ins and visits with these youth every 30 days. So our staff, our licensed social workers, are going out every 30 days to see how these kids are doing, and we're following up with the partners and services that we've recommended to ensure that they, too, are doing their part. And then once a child meets all of the goals of his or her plan, we would discharge them, but we do follow-up for a full year after to ensure that they're safe, and to ensure that they know that they have our staff and our organization to reach out to should anything happen. So just a few points about our data. Since August of 2009, which was when we were first created, we've received over 990 referrals for children. Referrals have been received from 70 counties across the state. So this does happen all across the state. It's not just a Metro Atlanta problem. On average, our victims are 14.6 years old. That's our average age. And they've been in this life for about 12 months, so a full year by the time that we get to them. So that's a year's worth of brainwashing and grooming and recruiting that we need to undo. And then our statistics, just a few interesting things that I think kind of help break down maybe some of those preconceived notions or misperceptions about this issue. 91% of the victims were actually attending school. And so a lot of people think these are dropouts, they're not going to school, they don't care about their education, they're just out on the street. It's not true. 91% of our victims were actively attending school. And again, this goes back to some of these traffickers are pretty smart, right? So they know that if the child is out of school for 10 or more days, that gets reported, and that defects can sometimes be involved. So we have pimps and traffickers that will drop these kids off at school and pick them up in the afternoon after school. 79% of victims have been charged with a status offense and were involved in the juvenile justice system, and 75% of them had been in detention and been detained previously. And then over 80% of our youth have a history of child abuse. As you can also see, there were some issues at school. Maybe youth weren't excelling at school and were behind on grade level, about 31% of our youth. And of course, 77% reported running away previously. There's a lot of case studies, and I'm happy to share this presentation. For the sake of time, I'll just use one example. So a girl was fighting with her mother in Ohio. She was from Ohio, but her parents had split up, and her biological father lived down here in Atlanta. And so after all those fights, her mother and her father decided it would be best for the youth to relocate to Georgia. So after living with her father for a short time, they began fighting and arguing, just the same as she was with her mother. The youth returned home from school one day and found a packed bag, and her father grabbed her, stuffed her in the trunk, took her downtown, and sold her to a trafficker. He raped her repeatedly, then set up dates and sold her to men to have sex, and then she was later transferred to another trafficker and had another exploiter. So it does happen, and that's just kind of an example of what one of the kids that we serve has gone through. So of course, reporting, call Georgia Cares if you know a child that has been involved. Also call DFACS. We will follow up with DFACS as well. If DFACS is unresponsive, we encourage you to call law enforcement. If the child is in immediate danger, of course, call 911. And then you can make a referral to our office, and all of that information is here. And then how to get involved. There are many ways to get involved. We have volunteer opportunities, internship opportunities, opportunities to mentor with youth. We partner with organizations all the time. You can donate items for victims. You can join us on social media and visit our website, of course. Sorry, shameless plug. But to know more about the work that we're doing, or if you'd like to get involved, and here's all of our contact information. So that's the website and our social media links. Thank you so much for having me. I'm here for any questions afterwards. Oh. Yes, sir?
Great presentation, thank you. And I'm just painfully aware this is going on. One of my problems I have is that this is not part of my world naturally. I mean, I have 3 daughters, and if what you call it, distinctively older boyfriend shows up at my house, I'm afraid that Mr. Fortner is going to get to know me. But so my question is, for those, see all this pathways and different aspects of it, and I'm kind of at a loss to think, how exactly can a group of people get together and say, we want to have the biggest impact possible? So what one thing could a group of people do that could have an impact on the broader issue, whether it's the Georgia Cares or some other trafficking organization?
I would say that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. That's great. I think awareness and education are huge. So I always say when someone's like, what's my one take home? Of course I want you to be involved with our organization. But for the issue in the field itself, what I always tell people is the smallest thing that you can do is take this back and tell one person in your life that doesn't know about this. And if they tell one person and they tell one person, it's a domino effect, right? So the more awareness and education we can bring to this issue, then the more we'll have. We all know these red flags now, right? So I'm sure you're even thinking about youth that you come in contact with, and you're going through your mental list to see if they meet any of these warning signs. So the more that you're educated, that's more kids that we can reach, that's more people aware in the community. Now that you know something, of course, you don't want this to happen in your community. You don't want this to happen in Douglasville. So just being armed and charged with that information and sharing that with other people, I mean, that's one small thing that everyone in this room could do, and think about the impact that even that would have, right? But then also, if you want to be more educated, we do targeted training. So we do trainings to community members about how they can get out on their community. I can share stats and information. We sort everything. I can tell you how many kids in Douglasville have been, or in the county of Douglas, who have been referred and who we've worked with, if you want that information. I mean, we'll provide very targeted information for you to be able to go out and recruit other people, to recruit volunteers. Yes, sir.
Let me push it just a little bit further.
Yeah.
What big thing could a group of people do? Would it be to tackle the early child abuse piece of it? Would it be to figure out how to get people off the street? Would it be to get involved in aftercare homes and things like that? I mean, where's the biggest bang for the buck if people said, we want to do something? Not just little, but we want to tackle this thing in a big way. Where would we target? What would we target?
For me, I think at least we have a mechanism now for getting these kids into care. So I would say the biggest places right now are for prevention. So if we're preventing child sexual abuse, we're hopefully preventing future victims of child sex trafficking, right? I shared some of the stats. So I think preventative efforts and teaching our kids healthy relationships, teaching them internet safety, teaching them what that means and how to respond appropriately. So, for example, a relationship with an older man is not appropriate, and here's why. And sharing that information, because we really need to be getting out and reaching groups of students, and early on. So I have 9 and 10-year-olds that have been referred to our agency. So we need to get out in middle schools and high schools, of course, too. But we need to get out earlier, and we need to start talking to our kids about this. And we have materials that I'd be happy to send to y'all. We do a training program to train people how to go out, to talk to schools, to talk to kids about what this is, and then also how to talk to school personnel about what they can do to spot these things and intervene.
We'll have 2 more questions, and just for the sake of time, yes, go ahead.
My name is Cassie Lipford, and I partner with a lot of schools and a lot of organizations in the community. Now, you just mentioned that you train people in the organization to talk about, but do you actually have like a team of people that will go out to different functions to like you're speaking to us to speak to, because I know you can't do everything, but do you have people that you can schedule to go out to different groups, organizations, and churches, as well as schools?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So we are a small staff. There are 7 of us total. So it is hard for us to get all around the state, but that's why I do these events, and I'm happy to go anywhere, and I have staff that I can send. But that's also why we're training volunteers. We have 10 volunteers right now, too, that we can send out. And so that's what I meant, too, that we train our volunteers and equip them to go out and do that as well. But yeah, we can come speak. We're happy to speak to a group if you have it. Yes, ma'am, I do. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Councilwoman Manley. I have a question. On your website, do you break down statistics as it relates to ethnicity, race? Okay, great. My other question is, I know that there have been questions asked in regards to what can we do in regards to one big thing. And just personally, I think the first step is every person who comes in contact with a child, whether it be in a home, a church, anywhere, you need to have a background check, just bottom line. I just wanted to, and I'm not sure if that's one of your points, but I just wanted to say it, because, you can look at someone, you can identify it. So anywhere, you need to have the background check. So.
That's a great point, and that's part of our volunteer and mentor training. We always require those things, and a fingerprint check as well. So that's a great point. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.